update, and with that we are ready to move on to our final segment for today. And we hope to talk about a very important industry in the financial sector, and that is non-banking finance industry that facilitates a wide range of financial services to the general public. And we have with us Mr. Dinesh Pereira, Chief Executive Officer of TKS Finance Limited, joining us for an detailed conversation on this sector. A very good evening to you.
Good evening, Nisanga.
Right. So, first of all, can you briefly give an overview of the non-banking finance industry in Sri Lanka?
Yeah, the financial sector, if you talk about the financial sector, there are few key elements. The main sector is the banking sector, which is, of course, the largest. And then comes the non-banking finance sector, which you basically call as the finance companies and the leasing companies. Then you have the other contractual savings organizations, such as the insurance sector and also the EPF, ETF. And then the final sector is the informal sector, which figures are not known, but is considered to be substantial in the Sri Lankan context, and which you commonly refer to as the black market.
Okay.
So NBFI is part of the financial sector, and basically it consists of the finance companies and the leasing companies.
Okay, and can you elaborate on the term NBFIs further?
Yeah, NBFI is a term used specially by the central bank to refer to the finance companies. And usually NBFI means non-banking finance institutions or finance industry.
Okay.
So, and there is a special department, separate department at the central bank who actually monitors this segment. So that is how this NBFI came into being.
Okay, so if you look at the local market, how big is this industry? What are the volumes that we are looking at?
Yeah, basically if you segregate the industry or the balance sheet, Sri Lankan balance sheet into the separate segments, the banking sector accounts for about 68% of the entire volume, which is about 10,575 billion.
Okay.
And the
huge.
NBFI, yes,
That's huge.
That's the largest actually. So NBFI accounts for 8.1%, and in rupee terms, it's about 1,246 billion. The specialized finance companies and the leasing companies, specialized leasing companies account for about 3.4%, Nisanga, and which is in rupee terms about 522 million. And contractual savings organizations such as the EPF and the insurance sector accounts for 19.8%, which is 3,040 billion. And of course, the informal sector, the figures are unknown, but it's also considered to be quite large.
Okay, so you've given us quite a comprehensive picture of the industry. So can you also talk about the contribution that is coming from this sector to stimulate the economy?
Yeah, if you take the Sri Lankan economy, especially Sri Lanka being a developing country, the entrepreneurs or the new people who want to start up a business, they hardly have the financial and backup financial stability or the financial background to start this.
Okay.
And especially when they want to approach a bank, they find it difficult to match the standards expected by the banks. So this is where the finance institutions come in to help these people start up a business, or be it a leasing facility, be it for working capital, or expand in the business by way of a property mortgage facility. So the role played by the financial institutions are especially at the grassroots level, even as low as microfinance, like say providing facilities as low as 50,000 rupees. And then once these customers are established, then they gradually move on to the bigger banks. And so the role played in developing the economy by the finance companies, I consider it to be very important, because it is at the startup point.
Okay, so what are the security measures in place as we've come across situations where finance companies have collapsed and investors have lost their funds? So in this situation, what are the regulatory measures in place to avoid those situations and experiences, repeating such bad experiences?
Yeah, non-banking finance industry is specially monitored, and actually it has to be first registered with the central bank, and thereafter it is regularly monitored and by the central bank.
Okay.
So by way of calling for continuous regular reports, site audits, and there are several ways that the central bank monitors. So at the moment, I don't think there will be any issues at the moment. And also, in case there are issues, there is a special deposit insurance scheme protecting the depositors. So
all around the country, across the entire country.
Across the financial industry, it is there. In all finance companies, it is monitored and regulated by the central bank, and there is that is up to a certain limit. The depositors are covered. So in case there is some issue, they will be compensated through this fund.
Okay.
And in terms of the finance companies, also there are, in case of a default, there are special ways and means. For example, you must have heard about seizing. So in case there is a default on the vehicle could be repossessed.
Okay.
That is regulated. And also in terms of money recovery, those days a recovery action used to take quite a long time, maybe 4 to 5 years. But now with the Special Debt Recovery Act, the procedure is quite short.
Okay.
So the recovery, in that sense, the recovery could be done quite quickly. So both ways, even on the side of the depositor or the investor, or on the side of the company, regulations and the mechanisms are in place to have a smooth operation.
Okay, and also can you talk about the different product segments we find in this industry?
The main product category here is the leasing product, which accounts for about 500 billion in non-banking finance industry alone. It's about 500 billion leasing. Then comes actually the secured loans, which accounts for about 400 billion, where mostly these are secured against property mortgages. And then there is the pawning, microfinance, and all those categories. But those two, the leasing and the secured loans against property mortgages, are the largest.
Okay, so since you spoke about leasing industry, can you talk a little bit about how this industry is progressing in this particular sector?
Yeah, actually earlier it was hire purchase, and now it has been converted to leasing. Especially leasing, there are two types, maybe vehicle leasing and the machine leasing. The highest exposure in the non-banking finance sector is on the vehicle leases. Actually, vehicle leases progressed quite well. However, in recent times, with the high price fluctuations and high prices, the leasing industry has been affected. And also to a certain extent, the LTV has controlled the growth in the vehicle leasing industry.
Okay.
So you can say like
LTV.
LTV.
Can you
yes.
elaborate on that term?
LTV, what you mean by LTV is the loan to value.
Okay.
For example, if it's an unregistered vehicle like a car, van or SUV, you can advance only up to 50% of the value.
Okay.
So that means if it's 10 million, you can give up to 5 million, and balance has to be borne by the customer. So the customers have to have 5 million in hand to buy a vehicle worth 10 million. So that is a controlling mechanism. However, certain segments like where the government wants vehicles, like for example commercial vehicles, you can go up to 90%. Also 100% in certain cases where it is used for certain purposes. So LTV controls the vehicle importing to a certain extent, and it has affected the leasing industry as well.
Okay, so if you look at microfinancing, can you define this sector and how could a person be eligible to come within this criteria and obtain a facility?
Yeah, microfinance actually it's basically if it's a self-employed category or maybe a household industry which needs a little bit of money, maybe 50,000, 100,000, small amounts like that, and it is considered as a group because the amounts are quite small, about 20-30 people or more, 50 people get together and they form a center, and then you go and service the people there in that location through that center, and that group facility or the center facilitates the recovery as well. Okay. So there are inter-guarantees and they guarantee each other, and it's like a group. Okay. And so basically it's startup and very small scale industries like home.
Okay, what is the security requirement for a microfinance
Microfinance, the finance company does not expect security because other than the personal guarantees of it's like a inter-guarantee. You guarantee each other, and you do not expect any fixed security from the microfinance sector.
Okay, so what sort of support do you think is required to grow this sector?
Yeah, now as I said earlier, the finance industry are the people who are helping the people who start up. So the inherent risk in a startup business is more for finance companies, whereas the banks, they take mostly customers from the finance company. So, however, in terms of recovery, banks are equipped with parate execution and recovery tools which are not given to the finance company. So in the future, if the facilities like that is extended, then maybe finance companies would want to take a little bit more risk and help the customers. So those type of things would help the finance companies in helping the customers better.
Right. So thank you very much for joining us today. It was quite an intense conversation. We covered almost all the areas we wanted